The brain functions in quite a sophisticated manner. As we said earlier, neurons in the brain work together in a networked fashion in order to contribute to our various behaviors, emotions, and even cognitions or thoughts. Different parts of the brain utilize different functions which influence the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in our lives. And there are certain brain regions which seem to be fairly specific to certain behaviors and functionality. And then there are parts of the brain which interact with one another in order to produce the outcomes of our behaviors, thoughts, and emotions. We learned a lot about the brain and its functions through studying when damage occurs or when malfunctioning occurs into different regions of the brain. Let's begin talking about the brain from the base of the brain, working our way up. The oldest region of the brain is the brainstem. The brainstem develops first during conception, as the first part of the brain to develop after conception occurs. It is also the oldest in terms of evolution. And the brainstem is what controls our basic functions such as swallowing and breathing and involuntary muscle movements. The pons and the medulla in particular help within the functioning of those areas. The brainstem, which enters the spinal cord, the brainstem where the spinal cord enters the skull, connects up into the midbrain region. And within the midbrain region, we can find the thalamus. The thalamus receives information about the senses. Our taste, touch, sight, and hearing are all processed and relayed from the brainstem into the middle region where the thalamus is located, and sends all that information up to the higher regions of the brain. We have the cerebellum, which helps us control our balance as well as other voluntary movements, as well as the limbic system, which sits between the older parts of the brain and the more recently evolved cerebral cortex on top of the brain. We have, not listed here, but we have the hippocampus, which controls the memory system or helps coordinate the memory system, as well as the hypothalamus in this particular region here in the midbrain. The hypothalamus helps control our feeding, the fight or flight response, our sexual activity as well is controlled by the hypothalamus. The reticular formation is a unique part of the brain which runs through the thalamus and the brainstem and helps control sleep and arousal, meaning our ability to be alert and awake. And it also helps us to filter the stimuli that comes into the body from the various senses and to usher that out to other parts of the brain. We already mentioned the limbic system, and now we'll turn our attention to a few of the pieces of the limbic system that we left out earlier. The amygdala, which controls fear and anger, and we already covered the hippocampus as well as the hypothalamus. The uppermost part of the brain, the most recent to develop both in terms of evolution and what develops last after conception, is the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex is the outer covering of the brain. And it is divided into two hemispheres, which in combination help us control higher order functioning, helps us control motor functioning, our higher order cognitive processes, aspects such as time management, task management, time management, all of the higher aspects of cognitive functioning, almost like the conductor in an orchestra who has to coordinate the most sophisticated parts of an orchestra. This is what's located in the cerebral cortex. And we're talking about this region up here. The cerebral cortex is further, the cerebral cortex is divided into two hemispheres, two portions, which are connected by a line of fibers that help communicate from left to right. And we further divide the brain into 4 regions. We have the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. So the frontal lobes, in this region here in orange, are what coordinate movement and higher level functioning. It is also within the frontal lobe that we find the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area, which control our speech and language and comprehension and speech production. If there is damage to these areas of the brain, it can lead to severe difficulties in speech production or in speech comprehension. The parietal lobes, located kind of on the top of the brain, are what helps control the senses of touch, and we have neural pathways all the way down to the feet and the palms of the hand, which send information to the parietal lobe for sensory information. The temporal lobe, which are located near our temple, helps control hearing, among other functions. And finally, the occipital lobe, located ironically in the back of the head, are what helps us control vision. These 4 lobes coordinate with each other to lead to all of our behaviors, thoughts, and emotions. And as we said earlier, if there is any damage to any of these regions, it leads to significant changes in our functioning. So as we said, this is an overview of quite a dense topic, but for the sake of the CLEP exam, we're just going to focus on these few areas in neuroanatomy.